Okay, hello everybody. How you guys doing? My name is Mark. This is Why I Hate the World. Thank you all for joining. I see we have at least one viewer. Thank you for joining. I am starting on time today. If you hear some loud music and shit from the in the background here, sorry about that. It's my neighbor who every morning decides to play really, really loud punk rock right when I want to stream. Which is, it's not bad music, but it's like, God damn it, buddy, can't you just wait a few hours? Anyway, so before we start, this is where we're at with the current piece, and I think I figured out why my stream is always so weird and choppy, and it's because I don't think the camera and software that I have can handle this image. So you notice here, like if I do this, see how it's all weird and choppy? But if I move it like that, suddenly it's totally fine. And I think it has to do with this. I don't think the software, it has some kind of bug where it can't handle like an image like this, which is kind of shitty because that's what I do best. But that's okay. That just means we'll just finish this one and then we'll do something that isn't so busy next time, I guess is the right word for it. So let me move this down here a little bit, so that way I'm not leaning way over. And let's go ahead and get started. Let's see if we can actually finish this one today. That'd be kind of nice, huh? So, this is our special, super after-school special episode, where we are going to be talking about the Satanic Panic today, right? And this should be a lot of fun. So what is the Satanic Panic, and why am I bringing it up? Well, I'm sure you've all seen that Lil Nas controversy that happened recently. For those of you who don't know what's going on with that, Lil Nas is a rapper, and who's created a little bit of controversy recently because he got with a viral marketing firm, and they decided to put out some satanic shoes, some satanic, Nikes, right? Devil Nikes or whatever. And this has caused the conservatives and the Christians in the country to just lose their minds, right? So Nike, for their part, were not involved with this at all. In fact, they're actually suing Lil Nas and his the people he worked with, right? They were not affiliated with this, and so what it was is they just bought the shoes themselves, and then did like a altered the shoes, painted them red or whatnot, and apparently they put a drop of human blood into the soles of every shoe, right? And people have really, that has really, really driven the conservative Christians in this country just up the wall, which I think is fucking hilarious, right? As to why this guy actually did it or whatever, blah, blah, blah. I think he said something in an interview akin to the fact of like, well, because Lil Nas is gay. He said something to the effect of, well, my entire life, this is what everybody's been saying. Everybody's been saying that I'm going to go to hell and all this other shit for my lifestyle and for what I, for being myself and all this shit. So this is what motivated him to make a satanic shoe and a music video of him like giving the devil a lap dance and that kind of thing, right? I think this shit's hilarious, because I really think it's really, well, for two reasons, right? First off, Satan is not real. Okay? There is no such thing as the devil. The devil does not exist, and it's really kind of like, it's to me, it's sort of like somebody getting mad when you tell them Santa Claus is not real. You know what I'm saying? Like, or some shit like that, or the Easter Bunny. It's the same sort of thing for me. People actually believe that, there's angels and demons and hell and all this other crap, and you're going to go burn for blah, 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 blah. So that, it always amuses me when you see people that take the trappings of mythology and treat them as you know, treat it as it's real life. But the thing about it, it's funny, but it's also disturbing because millions and millions of people are motivated by this, motivated by a very real fear of demons and devils and damnation and fear of the supernatural.
Mm.
And it's something that we should not take lightly. You know, this this fear that it produces in people in this country, right? And the capacity for these people in this country to act upon those fears is something that we should not take lightly. You know, it's something that can and often does result in real life, real world consequences for people. You know, very oftentimes innocent people who end up going to jail for, you know, end up getting arrested, going to jail, sometimes getting murdered, shit like that, because of the irrational beliefs of people who think that demonic forces are out there in the world. Right? So that's what this stream is mainly about. This is why I want to talk about this kind of stuff, because people believe this shit and people act on this shit. People vote depending on this stuff, and people, you know, will do strange and irrational things based on these beliefs. And this is why we should understand them. That way we can call them out and stand against them when the time comes, right? That doesn't look good. I don't like how that looks. That looks like shit. Maybe we can fix that a little bit. Anyway, so what is the Satanic Panic, right? Where did it start? Well, what do we mean when we say Satanic Panic? Well, it's basically this conspiracy theory that there are millions and millions of secret satanic cults out there around the country that are running shit behind the scenes and engaging in bizarre rituals that involve things like, you know, black masses and human sacrifice and the sacrifices of animals, things like that. You know, and there's tons and tons of satanic ritual abuse. That's the big part of this. The first big part of this is the satanic ritual abuse angle. This idea that, you know, there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of children who are ritually abused as part of these nasty, disgusting rituals. You know, satanic rituals, right? Whether they're beaten or they're sexually abused or something like that. You know, this is what they're talking about, number one. The other part of that is that often or not, these supposedly these rituals involve, you know, cannibalism, murder of children, cannibalism, forcing children to eat other children, shit like that. Right? And that's the big conspiracy. And the other part of this conspiracy as well is that these hidden cults of Satan worshippers have infiltrated our society in many ways. That they're running things behind the scenes. They're running the media. You know, so there's a lot of sort of I guess overlap with things like the Illuminati. You know, conspiracies, right? The protocols of the Elders of Zion, shit like that. There's a lot of overlap with these other bizarre, you know, Freemasons sort of conspiracy theories, and a lot of this shit is actually all part of the same thing. You know what I mean? Like, and you're hearing this a lot nowadays with QAnon. You know, it's just another sort of permutation of this sort of paranoid, ridiculous, anti-Semitic conspiracy theory bullshit. And now, instead of saying that they're, you know, instead of saying that it's Jews who've taken over the earth, now it's like, you know, pedophile politicians who are engaging in spirit science, you know, spirit cooking underneath the Comet Pizza in fucking Washington, D.C. It's all basically the same fucking shit, right? Recycling the same conspiracies over and over and over. So that's basically what it is, and it'll have, you know, lots of different you know, common themes throughout it. You know, we said things like you know, child sacrifice, kidnapping of children, you know, pets disappearing, being used in sacrificial rituals. You know, rumors about, you know, you ever heard the rumor about how like you shouldn't let your black cat, you know, if you have a cat that's black, you shouldn't let it go outside on Halloween, shit like that, because, you know, Satan worshippers will catch it and they'll sacrifice it in the middle of a fucking cemetery or some shit like that. That kind of thing. Lots of pushback against what they think is what they call witchcraft, you know, whether that's actual sort of like Gardenian, Wiccan sort of witchcraft, or whether it's some made up version of witchcraft that they just invent in their heads or something like that. So you'll see lots of moral outrage over symbols in things. You know, this corporate logo looks like a pentagram, or this video game has demonic imagery in it, or something like that, or whatever, that sort of thing. You know, they'll also include things that have nothing to do with Satanism under that as well. Things like the peace symbol, for example. They'll claim that, you'll see Christians claiming that the peace symbol is somehow satanic, that it's really the broken cross, right, or whatever. That's kind of bullshit. You'll see some people that go really nuts. They get really deep into this conspiracy theory stuff. Will start pointing out, like, you know, flags and shit, saying that you know, that finding hidden symbolism inside of like national flags or corporate logos, or, you know, stop signs, crap like that. You know, it's really a sun symbol, blah blah blah. So it just depends on how deep of this rabbit hole you want to go, right? Excuse me. Another thing you say, another very popular target for the Satanic Panic is Halloween. People will, you'll often hear Christian speakers and stuff talking about the evils of Halloween, and you know, how it's like a holiday for witches and all this other shit. And this gets really ridiculous too, because then you'll start seeing those like sort of hell house sort of alternatives, right? You ever seen one of those things? Like, I've never actually been to one, you know, but I've always kind of wanted to go to one. The Hell House, right? That's like where on what those are is like where on Halloween Christians will make like their sort of alternative Christian friendly haunted house, and instead of there being like vampires and zombies and shit, it'll be like a girl getting an abortion or something, and then she'll go to hell, right? Or like, you know, a couple of kids engaging in premarital sex, or like a kid drinking a beer or something like that, and then like he'll burn in hell or something, you know. And I've always kind of wanted to go to one of those because they look ridiculous and silly, and they don't really have those in Southern California. I mean, I guess I'd have to go to like fucking, you know, Louisiana or some shit to see one of those, right? But it would be interesting, you know, from a sociological point of view. You know, like I could just pretend that I'm like an anthropologist or some shit, and I'm just going for this to see the strange behavior of the native tribes. You know. Anyway, so you see that a lot. Another part of the conspiracy is that sometimes entire organizations are under the control of Satanists, whether that's entire towns, whether it's corporations, things like Procter and Gamble, for example. Another one that was very popular in the 70s, like there was a rumor that the founder of the McDonald's Corporation, Ray Kroc, was supporting Satanists. Hey, adversary, how you doing? You know, that was a big conspiracy theory sort of thing. That yeah, you know, the Ray Kroc. So Ray Kroc is basically the guy that took McDonald's and turned it from like a small restaurant into a national fucking chain, right? And at one point he was the richest man in America. At one point he was making like $40,000 a fucking hour or some shit like that. It was ridiculous, right? And there was this rumor back in the 70s that he was a Satanist, and that he was paying the Satanic Temple, and, you know, he was like supporting those guys financially. And where it came from was it came from somebody asked a pastor on his radio. A pastor had a radio show in the 70s, right? Somebody called in and claimed this was happening, right? And the pastor said, I don't believe that, whatever. And from that, some other pastor took that caller and put it in his newsletter, right? And it just sort of spiraled around. And you remember, like, in the days before the internet, memes would sometimes take years to get around. You know what I mean? Because, they would spread slowly. And the thing is, there'd be no way to debunk stuff. Like nowadays, you just go on Google and you just debunk something in 5 seconds. You know what I mean? But back then, you couldn't just, you couldn't just debunk shit from the, comfort of your own fucking cell phone, right? So rumors and memes and shit would go on for years and years and years, and this was one of those ones that just like, so eventually, like the people from McDonald's, Ray Kroc, they had to put out like a public statement saying Ray Kroc is not a Satanist, right? Which is fucking ridiculous, But that's how this shit happens, and it's like, so that's part of the big satanic, satanic panic as well, is that there's these hidden cults that are just out there, and they're kidnapping hundreds of thousands of children, and they're making little babies, like they're killing little babies, and they're making their kids, they're raping children, and they're making them drink human blood and all this other crap. And it's like all of this stuff is complete bullshit. Like there's no proof for any of it. Another part of this is you'll see a lot of sort of persecution of other religions as satanic, especially, for example, Mormons, right? From the very conservative evangelical Christian wing, like apparently they really hate Mormons. And they think Mormons are like, one step above being like a pagan. And that's the conspiracy theory, is that a lot of Satanists and stuff will pretend to be Mormons, and that way they can hide their nefarious satanic activity. And of course, other non-Christian religions are all satanic too. Hinduism and stuff like that. It's all Satan worship under another name, according to these people, as well as atheists. They you really run into a lot of reading for this. I ran into a lot of claims that atheists are all satanic. Atheists are all Satan worshipers and shit like that, and it's all and this would run the gamut. It would run the gamut from some people who say that they're just they're just being like fooled by Satan, and then to other people who would just go like, no, it's all a lie, and would go all the way and say shit like, Satanists are really just lying, and there actually are Satan worship. I mean, atheists are really just lying, and they actually are Satan worshipers, and you can't trust atheists; they're evil. Blah 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 blah. All this stuff, you would see. So it's there really isn't very much a unifying theory, conspiracy theory behind any of this stuff. It all really depends on which grifter you're getting your source from, right? And how crazy they want to get. It runs the gamut from it's just it's a spiritual battle, all the way to that there are actual Satan worshipers in the streets behind every door who are ready to kidnap you and your child and force you to get the COVID vaccine, which is really the mark of the beast. You're starting to see that's becoming a very popular thing among insane far-right Christian conservatives, this idea that the COVID vaccine is now the mark of the beast, and that you're going to have. One story I saw was possible a COVID passport, which no one has, and what's the idea behind a COVID passport, right? It's the idea that you get your paperwork that shows you've been vaccinated, and then that means you get to go out and go to the store and go to the movies and eat sushi and get on an airplane, shit like that, without a mask and all that stuff. Right. That's 100% bullshit. That is there's nothing behind that whatsoever. No one has ever proposed any sort of policy like that in any state that I'm aware of, you know, or especially not on the national level. No one has ever said, hey, you can get this paperwork that shows you've been vaccinated, and then you don't have to follow any mask mandates, or you don't have to follow any social distancing, anything like that. No one has said any shit like that whatsoever. That's a complete conspiracy theory horseshit from start to finish. But now, you know, go on Facebook or just go on the internet and look up COVID passport, and you'll see thousands and thousands of fucking posts of Christians basically claiming that this is the new mark of the beast. I guess it's not going to be a secret microchip that Bill Gates implants in your forehead anymore. You know, it's funny how fast this shit evolves, doesn't it? How fast these conspiracy theories and you know, strange tales of you know, all this shit, how fast they fucking evolve and adapt depending on what's actually going on in the news currently, isn't it? Anyway, so let's see. Onward to Dystopia. Thanks for joining, by the way. So yeah, another part of this is the satanic infiltration of the military and government, of course. That's a big thing that you're seeing now, has been sort of revived with with QAnon. This idea that you know, the powerful elites and politicians in Washington and whatnot, you know, we're all in on this conspiracy theory. You know, that's kind of been around since the beginning. The idea of the Illuminati or whatever, you know, this sort of like cabal of rich and powerful people who just run everything. And you know, in the beginning, you know, most of these conspiracy theories, they would blame them on Jewish people. And it kind of goes to show that, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So now it's not so much Jewish people anymore. Now they're Satanists, and it's just it's a code word. You know what I mean? It's basically just like a dog whistle, an anti-Semitic, you know, anti-Semitic dog whistle, right? So when you hear people like Lauren Boebert or whatever like repeat this shit, and it's like, just take the word Satanist out and put the word Jewish in, and you can see what they're really trying to hide, you know, what they're really talking about, you know. The apple never falls that far from the tree, right? So, anyhow, so yeah, where does all this shit come from? Where did it all start, right? Because, you know, Christians in general have always kind of been, I guess, scared of advancement, right? Since pretty much forever, you know. They've been scared of science, you know, going back centuries, you know. They would, for example, take Galileo, right, proposes a theory that puts the, you know, that basically disproves the geocentric model of the world, of the universe cosmology, right? And he ends up getting persecuted by the church, you know, because his theory challenges their dogma. You know what I mean? And that's pretty much a theme that we're going to run across a lot. You know, pretty much any time something comes up which challenges the church's dogma or their position of power or their place in society or the sociological hierarchy of things, whenever something gets invented or a theory comes along or new technology comes along or anything like that that significantly has the potential to change society in pretty much any way, you find out that the church ends up being against it. And it's it doesn't matter what it is. It could be science, you know. We talked about Galileo, but vaccines was another one. Right, when vaccines first came out, way back when they were doing experiments with them, you know, it was, I mean, vaccines, you know, vaccination goes back hundreds of years. You know, they would do experiments with vaccination because they knew for example, smallpox, right? There were sort of like homemade versions of vaccines back then. Like they would take the dried up scabs, like you would get smallpox, you would get little sores all over yourself, right? Kind of like chickenpox. They would take the scabs of those from people and grind them up and then blow it up someone else's nose, and then that guy would be immune to smallpox, right? So they had, yeah, and this was just shit that like they just discovered through like fucking folk medicine and shit, for hundreds of years, right? And that was kind of the beginnings of vaccinations. So it's not like they didn't know and even if they didn't understand the science behind it at the time, they knew that these things worked. So when vaccines first became a thing, people would flip out about it, right? And it was the church, a lot of that came from the church. You're infesting us with, disease or whatever. Because diseases back then were attributed to evil spirits, right? And even in the 1700s, the 1800s, whatever, when you start getting like, the enlightened scientists or whatnot who figured this stuff out, and it was, principles behind germs and all that were become understood. You got to remember that the vast majority of people still believed in they still had a very superstitious view of the world. So, Louis Pasteur figures out, germ theory, all this other shit. It still takes, 50 to 80 years for that to get accepted by the general public. Right? So, yeah, it was basically, churches they were, in medicine, they were basically like standing in the way there. Whenever any sort of new technology comes around, the church is always against it. Churches were against, for example, translating the Bible into languages other than Latin for, hundreds of years, back in the Middle Ages, right? Because, why? Because that meant that normal people could read it. If normal people can read the Bible, then they don't need a priest to read it for them. They don't need a priest or a church to read it and interpret it for them. And then people stop going to church, and that was their rationale behind it. So for the printing press gets invented, and for hundreds of years, the church pushes back against that, and then the church would push back against literacy. Literacy for adults. Because they didn't want people reading their own Bibles without their influence. This is all true shit. I mean, this is all verifiable, right? And you would see the same thing, against, back in the day, you'd had things like penny dreadfuls, like jumping ahead a couple hundred years to the 19th century. You had things like pulp dime novels and penny dreadfuls is what they called them in England, right? Where you would get like sensational stories and people would go read stuff about Billy the Kid or that kind of thing. The church was very much against all that too. Right? Because they were immoral, and because they basically it was because it was something that they didn't have control over, Religious people always seem to be on the wrong side of history when it comes to a lot of this shit. When it comes to women's rights, women getting the right to vote, stuff like that, like anything that challenged traditional gender roles. When it came to birth control, the churches, basically religious people in general, but not just the church, meaning the Catholic Church, but they've always been against that too. They've always been against anything that allows women to be independent. Basically educating women as well. Anything that allows women to be independent, that allows them to live without having to be married or dependent upon their husbands or the rest of their family for monetarily, anything like that. Anything that would allow a woman to make her own choices and do her own, to live the life the way she wants, and instead of being beholden to a husband or father figure, they've always been against that. Why? Because it messes up basically their worldview. Their worldview that women, that's a very much a conservative Christian worldview. Women should be subservient to men. It says it right fucking there in the Bible. Right? So they're against that shit. Even when it comes to things like, education, reading, writing. And then you get into the 20th century, and it's like, that becomes like, whenever you get a technological innovation, moving pictures, movies, churches and religious groups are very much against that in the beginning. They're very much against people going and enjoying themselves in movies because of the moral corruption or whatever, records and music. They were very much against that. Everybody knows the whole like push against rock and roll, back in the 50s and 60s or whatever, that you got from church groups, the evil satanic rock and roll, right? There's a lot of parallels between that and the Satanic Panic of the 80s. People were saying the evil jungle music. There was also a lot of racism hidden in that as well. The push against rock and roll, But it didn't start with rock and roll. It started actually even back before that with like jazz music, There was a lot of Christian groups, conservative Christian groups that were against jazz and wanted to ban all of that because they saw it as a corrupting influence. The evil jungle rhythms of the, black people, right? And, so you can find references to that in like the 1920s and the 1930s. That's not me saying that, that's them. Right? That's exactly what you would find. And it always comes from these sort of Christian conservative groups that would go and they would burn record albums and stuff like that because it's all fucking racism. Racism and mixed in with a lot of because it's satanic. So kind of, it's kind of always sort of been like that. It's always been their go-to argument whenever some shit comes up that challenges the church in one way or another, right? Their go-to kind of argument has always been, after they lose every other argument, they go to Satan, right? And that's kind of what we're seeing now, So you did see in the 80s, they kind of, this is always sort of a thing that was in the background, you know what I mean? Like, and it sort of hit really big in the 1980s. The Satanic Panic, like, really, really took off during that time, right? Excuse me, I had to drink my soda there. And you started to see, you started to see a lot of backlash against lots of various pop culture type things, right? The biggest one probably being Dungeons and Dragons. That was a really huge, there was a massive push from the Christians against Dungeons and Dragons. They really didn't like that shit. And it was because you could role play. Dungeons and Dragons, I don't know if you've ever played it. I used to. I haven't played it in literally 20 years. But it was fun, And it's because you create a character and you role play as that character. And that's what drove the Christians really like crazy. And also because in Dungeons and Dragons, there's lots of magic and imagery of, druids and magic and you fight demons and that kind of thing. And there's cosmology, blah, 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 blah. And so that became a prime target for the Christian grifter crowd, And it got really bad. There were the rallies and shit where people were burning the stuff and they would make movies. There's a movie with Tom Hanks called Mazes and Monsters, right? And it was based on this case of a kid who committed suicide, right? And they found out that he played Dungeons and Dragons a couple of times. And it became this national fucking, national fucking story. And, people were trying to sue TSR over it, trying to, criminally prosecute TSR, you know, those are the guys that published Dungeons and Dragons, saying that they were fucking responsible for this kid's death and all that stuff, which is all bullshit. You know, this is pretty much, there's never really been a case where anyone has managed to prove that someone has killed themselves or committed an act of murder or whatever because of something they've read or a movie they've watched or a game they've played, you know. And it's not like they haven't tried. Okay, this is something you'll see. You know, this happens constantly, and even today, you know, there'll be a story about a kid who you know, there'll be a mass shooting or something like that, or a story of someone who went out and like, you know, murdered someone, right? And then in the news, it'll be like, you know, people will try to blame it on the fact that like the kid played video games or the kid watched a movie or, you know, that kind of thing. And you get these sort of like huckster kind of carpetbagger assholes that go around and like, you know, people like Jack Thompson. You know who Jack Thompson is? You know, is that his name? Let me just make sure I had his name right. I think because hang on a second, Jack. Let me just check this before I you know. Yeah, okay, Jack Thompson, that's the guy. He was basically the dude who was behind a real famous guy in the 80s, you know, 90s and, sorry, the 90s and the 2000s, right? Kind of got his start as a conservative, like, born-again activist who would go after rap music. Jack Thompson, you know, like, he had some shit way back in the day about Two Live Crew. You know, they put out that album, you know, Nasty as They Want to Be, and it had the, like, you know, Oh Me So Horny song or whatever, right? Jack Thompson was the guy that tried to get those guys banned. He tried to get the record company that put that out, tried to put those guys in jail. He also stood up against and tried to do the same thing against NWA back in the day. And then he got really famous in the 2000s for doing the same thing against video games. You know, called them murder simulators. And apparently this guy really, really, really didn't like Grand Theft Auto, you know. And he, you know, back in the, he took like several fucking lawsuits against, you know, Rockstar Games and Take-Two Interactive and all that stuff, trying to basically hold them liable for the deaths of, you know, because apparently there was a mass shooting. This one kid, there was a mass shooting, and, you know, they found out that he, like, was playing video games. You know, he was playing Doom, and he played, you know, a couple other games and that kind of thing. And this guy, Jack Thompson, basically tried to sue all the companies and the makers of these video games and movies that this kid was into, saying that he was, like, you know, they were liable for the deaths of all these, you know, the people that he killed. And it's like, you know, all that shit got dismissed. But it's funny, it's like, you know, this isn't, what I'm trying to say here is that this isn't shit that happened in ancient fucking history. This was like 2006. It's not that long ago. You know what I mean? And you still see the same thing happening today, you know, is what I'm trying to say. But it got really bad. It got really bad back in the 80s, and some people actually went to prison because of, you know, the Satanic Panic, right? You would get cases where people would, you know, claim that their children were being abused or whatever, and that they would, like, try to throw, you know, people in daycare centers, try to throw them in jail, claiming that they were part of this, like, satanic ritual abuse and all that stuff. And, you know, some people actually did go to prison, right? And so this has an effect on people's, you know, real people's lives, right? So where did this shit start? You know, it got really big in the 80s, you know, and it was like a huge thing. You know, you'd see like guys on TV talking about how the Smurfs were satanic, or He-Man was satanic, you know, or Yoda from Star Wars was like really a little demon, that kind of thing. You know, another one that you got was like backmasking on music, right? big conspiracy theory, like way back in the 60s and the 70s, about how, like, you know, certain rock bands would be backmasking, you know, satanic messages in their music. You know, Led Zeppelin, very famous for that. If you've never listened to it, it's actually on YouTube. There, you can get examples of supposed backmasking in Stairway to Heaven or something like that, and it's like, yeah, I guess it kind of sort of sounds like it. If you were on drugs and you decided to play your record backward and fuck up your needle on your record player because, you know, they didn't have like digital fucking shit back in the 70s, like, I guess if you were on a lot of drugs, it might kind of sound like Robert Plant is praying to Satan, but not really. Right? Um, you know, but it was like him and like Judas Priest and, like, you know, Black Sabbath and shit. You know, they kind of took some of this stuff and worked it into their marketing. You know, Iron Maiden, that kind of stuff. And by the 80s, you'd straight up see like album covers with devils and zombies and shit on them. You know, specifically to piss off the fucking Christians, right? But anyway, so I think a lot of this actually came from a reaction to pop culture. You know what I mean? So in the 60s, the late 60s, the 70s, Satan was kind of a big thing in pop culture, right? 1966, I think, is when the Church of Satan was actually founded in San Francisco, right? It was in California by, like, Anton LaVey founds the official Church of Satan, you know, right around then. That was a big deal. You know, people would protest that shit for, you know, there'd be like, you know, armies of Christians outside of that place protesting it. Everywhere that, you know, Anton LaVey was sort of like a media, you know, and he'd go on talk shows and stuff like that all the time, shit like that, right? So, you know, and so he got a little notorious, and he actually kind of like seemed to enjoy it, you know, because it spread the word around about his organization, right? So, you know, he was sort of like an internet troll before there were internet trolls, you know. And they still do this today. They'll still do things like they'll sue a city, like what they'll do is, like, the Church of Satan, say, like, there'll be a city, like, I remember one case where, like, this group of Christians sued in order to get a statue of the Ten Commandments to be put up in a courthouse. And then the Church of Satan will show up and they'll sue the same courthouse and say, like, okay, well, that means you have to put a statue of Baphomet in this courthouse as well, you know. And then, of course, all the Christians would object to that, and then it would go to court saying, hey, well, how come if we can put the Ten Commandments here, you know, the state is not allowed to favor one religion or another, so that means you have to put fucking Baphomet. And ultimately, they end up taking them both out, which was the aim all along. That kind of thing. So they're still very much active in shit like that, right? So anyway, that was a big deal, right? But then also in the 70s, you also had a lot of stuff like, you know, things like The Exorcist, movies like The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, you know, The Omen, that kind of thing, right? And also a lot of, like, exploitation movies, you know. This is right around the time when it became, you know, the rating system was enforced, and it became okay to have R-rated movies with sex and blood and gore, you know, in the 70s. That's when you first started seeing slasher flicks, you know. You first started seeing, like, people, you could say the F word, shit like that, you know. And even hardcore pornography became legal, you know, because for decades and decades, hardcore pornography was totally illegal, and you can go to fucking prison, right, if you, like, filmed any of that stuff. And it became illegal back in the 70s with a Deep Throat was one of the first ones to sort of push that envelope and get an X rating, right? And a lot of the Christian groups out there kind of saw this as a sort of moral, the moral degenerates taking over society. Like they and imagine if you're one of these people. Imagine if you're a conservative Christian guy, you know, and things used to be like they were in the 1950s. Everything was all quiet and happy, Leave It to Beaverish, blah 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 blah. You go to a movie, and movies were like every movie was like family clean. Even movies that were supposed to be scary didn't have blood and gore in them or whatever. There were no tits, nothing like that, right? And then by the time, now imagine like 1975 from 1955. A lot of shit changed between 1975 and 1955, just in the way that the nation was, right? A lot of social changes, the civil rights movement, stuff like that, but also just in normal pop culture. Now you can have movies with swearing and boobs and sex, and you can go get fucking, you can go get pornography and stuff. Shit that was illegal for years and years and years. And oh no, black people are having, are in relationships and getting married to white people, and it's pandemonium. Right? So you could see a lot of this stuff. You could see where the reaction came from. Society changed way more in those 20 years than I would even say from, like the change from 2000 to now has been roughly 20 years, and life has not changed that much at all, But I can imagine the change from 1955 to 1975 was just way bigger, right? So a lot of people, and what happens when people are uncertain? That's what it is that you get a lot of people, a lot of conservative Christians who are now uncertain about their role in society and life. Well, when conservatives are uncertain about things, they tend to double down on the shit that they are certain about. That number one being their religion. So that's why you got a lot of like moral crusaders coming around, around this time, right? And it was like, yeah, it was very much in response to the changes that you saw in society and in just media and pop culture in general that you saw within the 60s and the 70s. And you got this pushback, and it wasn't just, the Satanic Panic. You saw like sort of, there were sort of equivalent movements in the 80s too. Things like the moral majority, Ronald Reagan becomes a president, like, the return to normalcy, blah, 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 blah. You saw, so there was very much a swing back towards the conservative end in the 80s. And it's sort of like, you can kind of see that pendulum swing back and forth, swings a little more towards the liberal side in the 90s and then back towards the conservative side in the 2000s. And now it's actually swinging more towards the liberal side again. It sort of kind of goes on a 15 to 20 year sort of cycle. So you can expect it around 2030, 2035 are probably gonna swing far back to the right again in this country, Anyway, and it's very like yeah. So there was also a book that came out which had a lot to do with this stuff in 1980 called how much time we at? We're at an hour already. I have been talking for an hour. Holy fuck! I have barely drawn anything in an hour. I got to like step my shit up here. Anyway. So there was a book that came out in the 80s, 1980, and it was called Michelle Remembers, which I've never actually read myself. I've heard about it. And basically what it is, it's a guy who's a psychologist, right? His name was Lawrence Pastor. And he claimed that he, took this woman named Michelle Smith and went through sort of what they call hypnotic regression, right? And hypnotic regression is kind of a pseudoscience, it's not actually proved to, like, basically the idea is that it's supposed to uncover repressed memories, right? And there's no real definite proof whether it actually does this or not. Some people say it does, it repressed memories of, say, past abuse, right? And there are people that say that it has legitimate uses. I'm not so convinced myself, You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't really know enough about it myself to make that judgment. I can say that it kind of sounds like bullshit to me because people, they use this same technique to uncover people's past lives. You know, people who claim that they were fucking Joan of Arc or some shit, or Napoleon in a past life. They use hypnotic regression. You know, they call it past life hypnotic regression. There's other people that use the same technique to supposedly pull up like fucking hidden memories of alien abductions and shit. Right? So now, but just because it can be used to pull up things that, to support things which are obvious bullshit, doesn't mean that there's no legitimacy to it. It very well could be that this could be a technique which can be used in a legitimate way in order to uncover repressed memories of past trauma, because we do know that that is a real phenomenon. It actually is a real phenomenon where people who get, severe trauma, your mind can block it out, and then you end up remembering things later, years later, and it's like, oh yeah, I remember that happened. Shit, I didn't even, one of those things that your mind just blocks out because it was too fucking stressful at the time or whatever. We do know that that's a true phenomenon, right? So I don't know. I don't really know one way or the other to claim if this is like pure pseudoscience or not. I will say that just to me, in my opinion, I wouldn't trust it, and I don't think it should be something that, for example, should be allowed in a court of law, right? As evidence of past abuse or some shit. You should never convict somebody on whether or not, like, past, hypnotic regression has uncovered, like, testimony of past abuses, that kind of thing. But anyway, in this book, it's called Michelle Remembers. Michelle Smith went through 600 hours of hypnotic regression and pulled up all kinds of crazy, outlandish stuff about satanic ritual abuse. Everything from really bizarre rituals where she was like raped and like made to drink goat's blood, shit like that, to where like they would actually sacrifice babies at like a black altar, and and this book became a major sensation in 1980, right? And it just so happens that people would start investigating this stuff to see if it's actually true, because, this describes actual crimes. It is illegal to murder children, obviously. It is illegal to rape children. It doesn't matter if it's your religion or not. And it just so happened that, they couldn't really find any witnesses that said any of this actually happened. So, for example, the claim was that in a town called Victoria in Canada, there was this cemetery where they would hold this black mass in the middle of the night, right? Well, this is an actual real town where real people live, and nobody there, of course, remembers, there are no witnesses to this. I think it'd be kind of hard to have, like, satanic rituals with dozens of people on a regular basis in the middle of the night in a cemetery and not have anybody notice. Another thing she claimed was that the priests of this cult had to chop off one of their fingers in order to be in it, and it just so happened that nobody really in this town had a missing finger. So where are they coming from? Now the thing about this, though, is that the beautiful thing about conspiracy theories is that there's always an out when you're proved to not be true. It's like, well, the reason why you don't find any witnesses is because they're in on it, right? The reason why you don't see the people with their fingers cut off is because they're being hidden from you. They're just wearing gloves, or they're wearing a fake finger, and it's all part of the conspiracy theory. And that's the great thing about believing in conspiracy theories, is that the evidence that opposes the conspiracy theory just reinforces it for the believer. And it's very much like a religion in that way. And this is why you always see people who are very religious, tend to also believe in conspiracy theories, right? They tend to be the same fucking people. It's always the people who believe that Satan is fucking secretly controlling everything from behind the scenes and all that shit. They're also the ones that are highly, highly religious and go to church every Sunday and vote Republican because they think we have to bomb the Middle East so that Jesus will finally come back and fucking outlaw abortion or some shit. Right. So funny how that all goes together. Anyway, so yeah, it turns out that this book was kind of horseshit, right? And that's one thing that you always see. Hey, Dynacat, how's it going, man? Thanks for joining. That's one thing that you always see when it comes to the Satanic Panic is that it sort of became this cottage industry, around this time. Lots of people writing books and giving talks and seminars and paid speeches, shit like that. People going on TV and claiming all these outlandish things, all the way to lawyers who would represent people who would try to get other people thrown in jail. For example, the case we mentioned a few minutes ago about the daycare center, and unscrupulous lawyers who would milk people for shit they knew that they were going to lose, right? Because so there's always that's one thing you got to remember whenever it comes to just not just conservatism in general, but especially when it comes to Christian activism, is that it's never done pro bono. It's never done for free. There's always that element of grift involved. Whether it's some asshole selling books or going on or getting donations to his ministry or trying to sue somebody and get money, there's always that grift involved. It's always that little bit of money. It's God loves you and he's all powerful and he's all knowing and all that shit, and he just can't handle money, kind of like in the immortal words of George Carlin, just can't handle money, he's just bad at arithmetic. So anyway, where were we at here? Michelle remembers, right? There is a guy here named John Todd, which was another one who was very famous, and he wrote a book in the early 70s, I think, or maybe it was it was the late 70s, right? John Todd was another one of these Christian grifter assholes who wrote a pretty famous book that sort of outlined, he basically took the Illuminati conspiracy theory, and instead of claiming it was Jewish people that were running the earth, it was instead Satan worshippers. And he claimed that a conspiracy of Satan worshippers and witches and druids and other sort of evil satanic types were running the world, essentially, and had their fingers in all of the world's big corporations and governments, stuff like that. This is all shit that is very, sounds very familiar today, doesn't it? This is like Alex Jones 101, right? Well, back then, back in the 70s, all this stuff was still pretty, this was all fringe. And, right. It's funny, it's almost mainstream now, isn't it? This the Illuminati and the Bilderbergers and the fucking Trilateral Commission and all of that shit. You hear it so often from so many people nowadays that it's almost become passé. Right. Well, this is where all this shit comes from, right? So, he claimed, John Todd claimed that he was actually on the High Council of the Illuminati himself, that he was a Satan-worshipping witch at one point. Also included in all this were the Jesuits, the Mafia, of course, the Freemasons, obviously. The Freemasons are always a major, favorite target of conspiracy theory types. And then also a group called Opus Dei, which is a sort of Catholic sect, I guess you would say, right? That are highly misunderstood. If you don't know what Opus Dei is, if you ever seen Angels and Demons, or the other one, the same guy that wrote that, the Celestine Prophecy or whatever, the guy by Dan Brown, that guy, right? He cast Opus Dei as the villains in that book, Angels and Demons or whatever, and in the movie for that, there's this scene where like this one monk is beating himself with a thorny whip and all that, and in real life it's like not even that extreme. They don't engage in acts of self-harm or whatever, but he casts Opus Dei as sort of like this secret sort of secret police kind of group for the Vatican or whatever, and it's like, that's pure fantasy. Opus Dei is a real thing. They don't murder people. Okay? They don't murder people. They don't beat themselves with fucking thorny whips or any shit like that. It's not, that has no basis in fucking reality. Anyway, so he says that, a lot of the stuff actually, like, it sounds familiar, right? It's because, also, you know who Jack Chick is? So Jack Chick is the guy that makes those, they call them, Chick tracts. They're those little Christian comic books that are like that big, and it'll say like, you're going to hell for, or something like that. And it'll be like those little funny ass comic books of like, that you'll get them, like people put them on telephone poles and shit like that. Chick tracts is what they're called, right? So a lot of the material for Chick tracts comes from this guy John Todd and the shit that he said, and it'll be like, like the Chick tract of like somebody listening to a heavy metal record or something, and then they end up in hell. That's John Todd came up with that, right? Anyway, he said that there was a guy named Raymond Buckland, right, who was the head of the Illuminati. And apparently Raymond Buckland was handpicked by Felipe Rothschild to be the head of the Council of the Illuminati or whatever. And this guy, Buckland, was supposedly a witch in Wicca, Gardenian Wicca. And also an anthropologist who worked at Cambridge. These are the claims that John Todd made in his book. Of course, in real life, this guy was not an anthropologist. He'd never taught at Cambridge. He was not an author, right? And in real life, this guy, Raymond Buckland, was a flight attendant for British Airways. And you got to remember, this is the 70s. There's no internet. So no one had, not only would not anybody have the ability to look this up if they wanted to, but even if somebody did debunk it, the same lie would get spread for years and years and years because, people didn't have access to this information. And frankly, Christians don't really, they don't really investigate shit anyway, right? When it comes to bizarre, they don't even do that today. If you ever argue with a Christian, they'll just say, untrue bullshit and repeat it like it's true, and no matter how many fucking times you debunk it or you point to them the actual truth or the actual facts or whatever, the next guy you argue with will just say the same shit over and over. And it's, it was the same back then, except then it was even harder to debunk stuff because, you didn't have a cell phone and Google. Right. John Todd also claimed that Jimmy Carter that's how long ago this was, so I guess late 70s, claimed that Jimmy Carter was handpicked by the Illuminati and that he was going to be installed as the Antichrist, which is like, okay, number one, that aged well. And secondly, Jimmy Carter was actually a evangelical Christian. He was evangelical. Like he was one of the guys. And the thing about Jimmy Carter is that he didn't wear his religion on his sleeve. He didn't shove it in people's faces. He said that he would not let it influence his policy decision making, and that's why the evangelicals really hated him, because, you know, he, for example, would not get behind legislation to ban abortion, for example. So the evangelicals really hated Jimmy Carter because, you know, he was one of their own, and he actually sort of obeyed the tenets of Christianity, right? And kind of goes to show that, you know, the people that call themselves Christian, they don't even follow the fucking teachings of the shit they're supposed to believe. And when someone actually does follow the teachings of Jesus, they fucking turn on his ass and call him the fucking Antichrist. So, anyway, that could be an entire stream of all by itself, why the Christians hated Jimmy Carter. In fact, I'm thinking I might make a stream about that, just in general, like evangelical politics in general, because there's a lot of very, very weird contradictions and shit when it comes to evangelical Christians. They're kind of all over the place, and they also kind of act in the exact opposite manner of somebody that you would expect to be a Christian, you know? The evangelicals in particular, but conservative right-wing Christians tend to do the exact opposite of what Jesus would do. So that might be an interesting stream one of these days. Maybe we'll do that. Anyway, so this guy, John Todd, also claimed to have invented Christian rock, you know, and he said that he did it as when he was part of the Illuminati as a way to corrupt the minds of youth and to get Christians to embrace rock and roll, because apparently it's not really the content of a song. It's the actual rhythms and beats and stuff. And this is something that, you know, we mentioned earlier in the stream when, you know, the conservative backlash against rock and roll in the 50s and 60s, where they would basically, you know, it was all racism. You know, they would call them the jungle rhythms and shit like that, right? And supposedly that's the idea. If you ever go back and read any of that shit, it's not the content of the song. It's, although they will say, you know, the songs are all sexual and that kind of thing too, but it's not just that. It's the actual beats, the jungle beats, and they would compare these to, you know, jungle beats that you would get from like fucking native tribesmen in Africa and stuff, and claim that that's how Satan would invade your mind, through these repetitive beats. Right? So just a little bit of racism thrown in there for the mix too. You got to remember, it's not all cultural. There's plenty of fucking racism to go around in this as well, you know. So he claimed that he invented Christian rock as a way to get Christians to get brainwashed by Satan. Right. And eventually this guy, John Todd, pissed off the wrong people. And and apparently what it was is that he started to speak up against some mega ministries, you know, these giant sort of corporate churches that you would see. And even back then, today they're gigantic mega churches, you know, churches with fucking 100,000 people in them, you know what I mean, that have these like 700 Club style, you know, ministries that go on the air, and Creflo Dollar and shit flying around in a fucking private jet, that kind of thing. I mean, today they're just massively gigantic, you know. But back then, back in the 70s and 80s, is, you know, they were still equally as big back then. Maybe they didn't make as much money as they do today, you know. But that was still kind of a new thing, you know, television ministries, you know, ministries where they would like, you know, like that was when it was all sort of emerging, right? And apparently he pissed off the wrong people, and so some people started to investigate this guy, and there was an article that came out in a magazine called, I got it right here. It was called, I don't know, I can't remember, I don't have the name of the magazine, but apparently a couple of Christian magazines investigated him and found out, of course, that he was all a fraud. No surprise there, that he all made all this shit up. He didn't live in the places he said that he lived. There's no such fucking thing as, you know, the Illuminati. I mean, if there's one thing that you could, like, pretty much, you know, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, who reads shit like this and actually fucking believes it? You know what I mean? Like, who fucking reads this shit and is like, oh, this is blood-drinking Satanists run an entire fucking country. Yeah, okay, I believe that. I don't know. But like I said, you know, the more religious people are, the more likely they are to believe in really stupid shit, right? And anyway, John Todd eventually fell from grace, and in 1987, he was arrested for the rape of a college student who went to the University of South Carolina, and also charged with molesting 2 children at the karate studio that he worked with. And he spent roughly 22 years in jail. He was released in 2004, and then he died in 2007. It's very, very funny, I think, how all the people who are very, very loud and, you know, adamant about rape and child molestation, all that, how they tend to be the people that end up raping and molesting children. You know, isn't that funny? Isn't that strange how that works out? You know, the people that, you know, kind of like, for example, Matt Gaetz. We're seeing him in the news. I don't know if you guys saw my video that I made about Matt Gaetz yesterday, you know, and it's always like, oh, why is it that we're not seeing, like, you know, hundreds of conservative Christians and shit out there, you know, protesting at Matt Gaetz's office? It's like, yeah, okay. Because when one of their fucking own is guilty of it, they all shut the hell up. Anyway, allegedly, I can't say that he actually is guilty or not. The investigation is going, so allegedly, I could just say that he's under investigation. I can't say that he's guilty. Don't want to get sued. But still, I just think that's a strange phenomenon. You know, it's almost like they don't really give a shit about rape or child molestation, and it's almost like they just use it as a way to get people excited and to get them to buy their books and go to their seminars and pay them to give speeches, you know. But when the rubber hits the road, they don't actually give a fuck about it. It's almost like that. I wonder why. Anyway, fucking hand hurts. So there's like sort of a cottage industry of assholes who did shit like this. You know, there was another guy named Joseph Doc Marquis who claimed pretty much the exact same shit. You know, he mixed a lot of the elders of the, you know, of a lot of anti-Semitism into it. He claimed that the elders of the Protocols of Zion was an accurate document, except that it wasn't Jewish people, it was Satanists. You know, if you don't know what that is, the elders of the Protocol of Zion, it's basically a conspiracy theory, you know, that goes back at least to the turn of the 20th century and probably before that, right? But at least to there, and you see it pop up a lot in white supremacist literature, that kind of thing. And it's supposed to be this document that was like a, you know, an outline of, you know, if you hear about the Jewish overlords, you know, the Illuminati, blah, 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 that's where this comes from. It comes from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, right? And it's essentially the reason why Jewish people have been blamed for, you know, everything bad that ever happens ever, right? You know, you'll get, at one point or another, you know, they've been blamed for Bolshevism, they've been blamed for communism, you know, for the Bolsheviks taking over the Soviet Union and, you know, communism and all that shit, right? They've been blamed for just pretty much, you know, everything bad that ever fucking happens. And this is one of those things that, you know, one of those phony baloney documents that, like, Hitler pointed to for one of his reasons as to why the Jewish people should be destroyed, that kind of thing. So, you know, I mean, it's worth reading just to sort of know your enemy kind of thing, so that when you do see, because there are even people today that still bring this shit up, you know, there's white supremacists and stuff bring this debunked horseshit. They bring it up over and over, and it's good to know about it so that you can point out and defend yourself from it. You know what I mean? And you can like see when it's being recycled, right? Because it's like a good conspiracy theory never dies. That's the thing. A good conspiracy theory will just get recycled in one form or another, over and over and over. You know. Anyway, the same thing. Getting back to Joseph Marquis, he was also kind of one of these grifter assholes. He claimed that there were 8 attempts on his life or whatever, and that the first one, but apparently he only reported the first attempt of his life to the police, and they couldn't actually follow up or find anything. And for somebody who was, had a $500,000 price on his head, he seemed to not take any precautions. He lived openly. He wasn't living, hidden or anything like that. He often gave speeches and paid talks and would go on TV, that kind of thing. Kind of like it was all bullshit. Right? So you saw shit like this all the time. I mean, that's the thing. And you're even seeing it, today. There's still like the Satanic Panic. It never actually really stopped. You know what I mean? Yeah, okay, it maybe calmed down a little bit, but you still see the exact same rhetoric today. When Pokemon came out, for example, there was a big push against Pokemon, because it's like the demonic fucking, of pastors and shit calling Pokemon demonic, and how they're like little monsters that, this is how the demons get inside of your brain and all this other shit. Stuff like that, right? That was a big, I mean, and it's just like I was saying, it just gets recycled over and over and over. And I really think that we're seeing a lot of this now, with QAnon and things like Lil Nas and all that stuff, right? We're seeing it because it's sort of like the last, I guess the last what's a good way to put this? I guess it would be, one way to put it would be the last stand in the culture war, I guess, is one way to put it. Although that doesn't really, it's sort of like they've lost the culture war, right? The conservatives. And they've kind of been losing it for decades. So the culture war today is about, it keeps getting pushed further and further to the left. Culture war back in the 80s, the 60s and the 70s and the 80s used to be about just having premarital sex. That's what it was about. Okay. Just the fact of allowing, condoms or birth control or divorce, right? Those were culture war. That's what the culture war was being fought about, right? And then that turned to drugs, drug legalization, drug criminalization. So after they lost that shit, after the Christians and the conservatives tried to fight back and lost because people like to fuck. Right? People like to have sex with each other for fun and not have to be married and not have to have kids. Right? After they lost that shit, then it became about drugs and in the 80s too, and now they've kind of lost that front also, right? Things like marijuana, was the devil's weed. That's another one, marijuana was another one that they used Satan to fight against, right? They've kind of lost that front as well. So drug use has become something that is becoming decriminalized in the country. In particular, marijuana, it's legal in several states now, right? I mean, God, I think 14 states at this point it's legal. So they lost that side, right? They lost the sex for pleasure and recreation. They lost that part. They lost that fight. They lost the fight against pornography. That's way beyond. There's no way ever that they'll be able to outlaw pornography. They lost the fight against educating women and birth control. They know that that's gone too. Abortion, right? They know that even though they tried their hardest to outlaw abortion and all that stuff, they pretty much know, the conservative Christians and the evangelicals and all that stuff. They pretty much know that there's no going back. That they're never really going to be able to outlaw abortion. They're never really going to be able to, like at one point back in the day, back in the 19th century and stuff, condoms were fucking illegal. Okay, like, you got to remember, like it wasn't all. You didn't always have the way life is now, where shit's essentially, you have a lot of freedom when it comes to your personal choices and how you want to live your life and shit. And it wasn't always like that, back in the 19th century, I mean, you could go to jail for giving somebody a pamphlet about birth control. Not just giving them access to birth control or a condom or something like that. Just giving them information about birth control could land you in jail back in the 1880s or something. Right. So you got to remember, this is where people are coming from. They lost that shit. They lost that fight. They lost the fight against music. They tried to ban fucking music. They tried to ban, like, sex in movies, nudity in movies, gore in movies, stuff like that. They lost all of that shit. So now the culture war has shifted. It's shifted further and further right. And they've essentially, like, they're starting to lose when it comes to, like, gay rights. Gay marriage is legal now. That was another front that they've kind of lost, and that's never going to go back. They'll never be able to. Once you have that freedom, no one in Congress is ever going to put up a bill saying, we're just going to outlaw gay marriage again. No, it'll never happen that way, and they know it. They know it'll never happen. So they're pushing the culture war even further right. So right now it's at trans rights. It's at trans rights. You're starting to see states pass laws against, say, for example, trans athletes in high school. They're trying to restrict access for people who are under 18 to be able to transition, stuff like that. And some of these things, maybe you could say, okay, well, maybe you shouldn't be able to do it until you're 18, or maybe you should, or maybe it doesn't cause any damage, and so you should allow children to take it, blah, 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 whatever. I'm not here to say anything one way or the other. Whatever you believe is cool, and we can talk about that later, but the point is, that's where the fight is. It's like they kind of lost, like, all of these other fronts in the culture war. They've lost, and they've been continuously losing for decades, right? And each time one of these we get these new freedoms, the way they see it is that the influence of the church gets less and less and less. That's the way they see it, right? And it's, whether you think that's true or not, I don't think it's true. I think really what's going on is the internet is what's killing religion. That's what I think. I think people now have the ability to actually fact check shit that they didn't have in the prior decades. And so now they know that if they read a book about some guy talking about fucking satanic pedophiles, they can actually cross-check this shit and see, like, where is this guy from? Did this actually happen? Is there actually a town called fucking Providence, whatever, Is there actually these places really exist, Are these people that are claiming this shit's happened, do they have criminal records, right? You can look this stuff up, where you couldn't do it before. So even if you are somebody who believes in this stuff, if you're a Christian, if you believe that the supernatural is a part of your daily life, even those people now have access to the tools in order to debunk this horseshit, right? And that's why they're losing. So now it's becoming more and more, concentrated, number one, and it's becoming more and more outlandish. And so the latest, like, expression of the Satanic Panic here is like QAnon. That's what it is, right? You're seeing, because QAnon believes in all the same shit. It's all the same things. It's just basically the Satanic Panic redressed and resold to a new generation. Baby eating, raping Satanists, cannibals who run everything, right? Are secretly kidnapping and raping and molesting children, and it's the exact same shit as except this time it's not people in daycare centers. It's not fucking, you know, it's not satanic rock stars going up on stage biting the heads off of bats and wearing makeup like fucking Kiss makeup or whatever. It's Nancy Pelosi. It's the Democrats this time. You know, it's just recycling the same fucking stupid, ridiculous horseshit over and over and over again for a new generation who, like, you know, of Christians who, because they fucking believe that Satan is real, because their worldview says that they're in the middle of a cosmic struggle for the fate of the universe. And, you know, whether or not they decide to, like, smoke weed or have sex with their girlfriend without being married will influence, right? Whether that personal choice they make is going to, you know, they believe that choice is going to influence the fate of the universe. And this is why people take this shit so seriously. So, you know, and I'm not making that up. That's true shit. You know, that's the mindset. The mindset is if we allow these things, if we allow people to act in these ways, and you know, it will result in, you know, Satan winning. Right? So how do they fight back against Satan? They you know, they ban fucking Pokemon, and they you know, cancel fucking Lil Nas, right? And they, like, try to get Nancy Pelosi fucking arrested or whatever, and break into the Capitol building to hang Mike Pence or whatever, because, you know, obviously Satan fucking rigged the election. Right? So anyway, that's the scary fucking thing, you know. I mean, this is like QAnon is essentially another, just, it's basically Christianity 2.0. That's what QAnon is, you know. Now they're saying that, I mean, this whole thing with you know, Trump was supposed to become president on, you know, it was supposed to be the inauguration was never going to happen. And then the inauguration happens, and it's like, now he's going to become president on March 6th, you know, and then that doesn't happen. Now they've just moved the goalpost back, and it's like, okay, well, in August, Donald Trump is going to become president again in August. It's the same fucking thing. It's like, there's really no difference between this and, like, you know, Harold Camping saying that the fucking world is going to end. Remember that guy? Remember Harold Camping in 2011? He was this, like, sort of cult leader Christian guy that convinced all of his followers that the world was going to end in 2011. And a lot of these people went and, like, fucking sold their houses. They sold their houses to put up, like, to get money to put up big billboards and advertisings and things saying, the rapture's coming, the rapture's coming. And then the fucking rapture didn't come. You know, remember that shit? And it was like, yeah, no fucking wonder, you know, no man knoweth the hour, you fucking idiot. Right? Even if you are a believer, even if you do believe this shit, the book that he says that you're supposed to fucking believe says that you're not going to be able to predict it, you fucking morons. So, I don't know. Like, that's what QAnon has become. QAnon has basically become a fucking another religion. So, anyway, it's I don't know. I think in one sense it's like, you know, that kind of tells me it's like they're losing the culture war again. They're losing this part, and things like trans rights and all that stuff. Just hang in there. Just hang in there and keep doing what you're doing. Keep protesting. Keep you know, keeping the pressure up and all that. And because we'll beat them. That's the thing. We'll beat the conservatives because they lose every fucking time. They've lost. You know, the culture war is basically a one-sided war because people like being free. You know, people like doing what they want to do. They don't like, especially when it comes to shit like this that doesn't hurt anybody, right? People like acting the way they want to act. And they don't like some crusty-ass fucking Southern Baptist piece of shit asshole telling them that they're going to go to hell for it. Right? And, you know, people like listening to the music they want to listen to. They like watching movies they want to watch. They like having sex with people they like having sex with. Or going to the fucking bathroom they want to go to. Or if they want to wear the certain kinds of clothes they want. Or if you want to go get, you know, surgery so that you're not feeling, you know, like you're in somebody else's body. That's what people want to do. And, you can't stop them because this is a free country. Ultimately, it's a free country. You know, you can't stop them. And if you try to stop them by claiming that they're going to go to hell, people are going to tell you to fuck off. And that's why the Christians always lose the fucking culture war, right? That's why they're continuously going to, that's why they're always going to lose it. And it's like, you know, and that's why they just get continuously crazier and crazier and crazier. Anyway, I think that's pretty much all of my prepared material. My hands hurt. Fuck. Let's go ahead and read some of the comments here for a bit. I don't know. I thought this was fun. You know, maybe we'll do sort of a themed, you know, themed streams like this more often, right? It's nice to, you know, now that the fucking world is starting to stabilize a bit, we don't have to worry about the fucking country being taken over by Nazis for a little while, right? At least until the next election. Maybe we could talk about some fun stuff like this once in a while. So let's see. Let's read some comments here. Dun, dun, dun. Adversary Fandin, hail Satan. You should visit a hell house dressed like the Doom guy. Oh man, that'd be awesome. They'd probably call the cops. You know, that would be cool though. I actually haven't played the latest Doom game. The last Doom game I played was Doom 3, which was actually pretty awesome, but I mean that was a long time ago. So I have been watching the like the cinematics for the latest Doom game. Like, fuck, this shit's crazy. It looks really good, and I think it was like Doom Eternal, right? I think is what it is. I'm thinking of definitely. I'm gonna get it eventually, you know. But just for the story and the artwork on it, like, fuck, how come they can't make a Doom movie that looks like the games? You know, why is it that every time they make a Doom movie, it like looks like shit? It's like, dude, just make the fucking video game. Anyway, let's see. Onward to Dystopia. America has done this over and over. Horror comic burning in the 50s, playing records backward in the 80s, Marilyn Manson in the 90s. Yeah, for sure. That's another one. Yeah, the comic scare in the 1950s. That's something we should have brought up. You know, you had like EC Comics and stuff like that, and then there were these hearings that you know, because comic books were like poisoning the minds of youth, and they were all, you know, homosexual communists and stuff that were taking them over, and that led directly to the Comics Code, which just so happened to put EC Comics out of business. I think ultimately, you know, that did result, though, in superheroes coming back in a big way. So we have pretty much we have that to thank for the Marvel Universe. So that's kind of cool. Like, you know, because of that, because of those hearings, because they put those restrictions that made it hard to publish things like horror comic books, a lot of the companies decided then to move towards superheroes because they couldn't do, you know, because it was all monster comics and stuff back then, you know. That was kind of a golden age for it. And you still had, like, superheroes. You still had Superman and that kind of thing during that era. But if you look at, like, say, the Superman comics, they were fucking goofy and stupid. You know, it was like Superman's pal Jimmy or whatever, and they would, like, go and, you know, there'd be, like, weird. It was like basically Superman was like, you know, it was like situational comedy almost, you know, and there'd be another one like, you know, Lois Lane, and it'd all be about how Lois Lane was trying to trick Superman into marrying her and shit like that. You know, you didn't really get like the same sort of plots and comics of that you got 10 or 20 years later, you know, and it's like, because of these hearings, then superheroes, they went back to superheroes, and they sort of, you know, that sort of led to what, like, you know, we have today. That led to the creation of the Marvel Universe, and then DC sort of consolidating its stuff together, and it led to that, to the stories that we have, and ultimately all the awesome movies that we get every year. So maybe that wasn't a bad thing completely, but it was definitely censorship. That's for sure. Wow, my camera's flipping out. See, if I take my hand away, right, check it out. If I take my hand away, it'll get all weird and choppy. If I put my hand back on, the choppiness goes away. I think it's just this image. I think the camera can't handle this image with all the detail on it. So whatever we draw after this, it will have to be something that isn't as detailed as this. What else we got? Onward to Dystopia. The Red Scare and Velvet Scare of earlier eras feel rather secular by comparison to the religious ones we see from the 80s forward. Yeah, totally. Although there was a lot of that in the Red Scare in particular. One thing they always say about communism is that it's godless. You know what I mean? Godless communism is going to take over, and commies don't have any regard for human life, shit like that. It's because they're godless, and they're, that's also, so there is a little bit of of that sort of satanic panic going on with that as well. But however, the Red Scare was very much more about a challenge to American hegemony, and also challenge to capitalism as well. That was really a major part of the Red Scare too. This idea that they were afraid that people would like it, and they would want things like universal health care, stuff like that, or a jobs guarantee, a guarantee that you could get a job. That was actually something the Soviet Union had, was a guarantee that you would get a job. It just so happened that the way they implemented that was like, no, we're going to tell you what job you get. You don't have a choice, and it was implemented badly. But in the actual theory itself, I kind of like the idea, for example, of a government that guarantees you work. I kind of like that idea. I think it should be a thing that's voluntary, but I think that falls under one of the, I think that very well falls under the whole, provide for the general welfare of your population. Like, I don't see what's wrong with going to the government and saying, hey, I need a job, and then them giving you a job. And whether or not that job is a good job is a different story. It could be a shitty job somewhere. Or it could be like, okay, we'll give you a job, but you have to move to fucking, Iowa to get it or something. But that, what's so wrong about that? You know what I mean? And then the thing is that if it's voluntary, if you don't have to take it, there you go. Like, apparently in the Soviet Union, it really wasn't that voluntary. You didn't have a choice when it came to some of that. Sometimes, when it came to some of that shit, I don't know. I don't really want to talk shit because I don't really know the particulars, but I could be very well wrong about that. But anyway, moving on. Onward to Dystopia. This Lil Nas X incident has been interesting. I didn't realize so many people still believe in a literal Satan. And what does that do to your mind to see Satan everywhere? For sure. I think, but like I'm saying, I think it really is on the wane. I think that this is like sort of the last gasp of conservatism, and there always are going to be crazy religious people out there, right? I don't think, for example, we're going to see people getting thrown in jail anymore for these sorts of satanic panic reasons, right? Like, you don't really see that anymore. You don't see people getting thrown in jail for ritualized, like, child abuse or something like that. Because, you have to prove those things. And although it actually did happen back in the day, there were cases of people getting thrown in prison, but it would, ultimately, people would eventually get, exonerated, right? Sometimes people would spend decades in prison. There was this case of, these three kids who, like, this one kid got murdered by his stepdad. I can't remember the name of it. In fact, you know what? I think I've got it. Let me look it up. I think I have a link to it. It was the West Memphis Three. This was an example, right? And it was in 1993. This one kid gets they find him dead in Memphis, Tennessee, and there's these three other kids who are kind of like bullies that they were like these teenagers, and they basically, like, they tried to pin this like this idea that they killed this kid as part of a satanic ritual because one of the kids was into heavy metal, right? And so these three kids, like two of them were teenagers, and then one of them was like 9 or something like that. Ended up going to prison for like fucking 14 years because of that. And they were exonerated because it turned out that the child that was murdered, it was like his stepdad ended up doing it. They actually found DNA evidence that proved that his stepdad did it. But that doesn't change the fact that these 3 kids got thrown in jail for some shit they didn't do, because the defense, or the fucking prosecution rather, like framed it like that they were like Satan worshippers. Right. So, but you don't really see that kind of thing happening nowadays very much. When was the last time that somebody went to prison for like murdering somebody in a satanic ritual? Like, I don't know. That doesn't mean that it'll never happen again, and it doesn't mean that people's beliefs in these things have diminished in any way. But I think it's very much more become like, I don't know, a lot easier for people to identify this shit. You know what I mean? Like, QAnon never really took root, in the mainstream as much as the Satanic Panic did. You know what I mean? Like, once QAnon hit the mainstream, it immediately got ridiculed. Right? It immediately got ridiculed, and it's like, why? Why did it get ridiculed so much? Because we have the internet. That's why. If something like QAnon were to hit the main, to take, like, say, if QAnon developed in the 80s, I think it probably would be way more widespread than it is now. And I think you'd actually see people going on trial and stuff. Because for the simple fact that, it was way harder to get proper information back then. You know what I mean? Like, a rumor would go around and it would just get repeated over and over. Somebody would write something and another guy would write another book and include shit from him, and then it would be on some dude's newsletter, and then, and it would just go around and around and around, because you didn't have the ability to fact check the stuff. You couldn't, like, and who's to say, like, what is and isn't true if nobody has access to the truth, right? Well, nowadays we do. Nowadays it's like, somebody posts a video, and then right there in the comment section, somebody else will come up and just be like, that shit's not true. That happens to me all the time. In fact, the last video I made about Matt Gaetz, I think it was it you or was it Dynacat? One of you guys pointed out to me that, him getting a pardon from Biden was not part of the extortion thing. I didn't know that, and it's like, that's great. We have the ability to fact check things, so I need to actually say a retraction there. That was not true. I was fed false information. In fact, I was actually fed false information from Matt Gaetz himself, because that's what he claimed in his interview with with fucking Tucker Carlson. So, anyway, what else we got? Let's go on. Onward to dystopia. Can't have comic books. Can't have heavy metal. Can't have D&D. Is there anything worse than a white evangelical? Yeah. What do they do for fun then? I guess they just go shoot things at a target, at a fucking shooting range. They go hunting. That's what they do. I guess it's not okay to pretend to be a wizard and kill monsters or something, but it's perfectly okay to go and kill real animals and shit. If you're an evangelical, I guess that's I guess that's acceptable. God likes it when you shoot things. God doesn't like it when you pretend to shoot things. I don't know. Dynacats, they don't murder people that you don't know about. Funny story, I heard about chick tracts like in the 70s, but until maybe 5 years ago I thought they were some feminist comics or something. Chick tracts kind of sound like it, huh? Onward to dystopia. I worked at a gay nightclub for years, and we'd find those in our mailbox. I saved them and have quite a collection at one time. Yeah, I used to collect them too. I still have one around here somewhere. I used to have a whole box of them, and then I lost them when I moved, unfortunately. But yeah, they're funny. I really like the ones where it's like the mark of the beast or whatever. Like, I don't know. I think you can order those online if you really want to, but you can only order them in bulk because they want you to like give. You can't just buy one at a time. You have to buy like 128 or some shit. So you end up giving them to your friends and that kind of thing. Let's see. Onward to Dystopia. A lot of this stuff in the 80s was just grifters riding the surging tide of Christian revival. I think Matt Gaetz is yeah, that's true. There was a lot. It was like a cottage industry of these fucking like sort of evangelical, like I don't know, man. Why is it that the more religious you are, the more likely you are to like give your money to someone like these obvious fucking hucksters, obvious fucking scam artists, like there was a thing, I don't know, you guys know who Creflo Dollar is? First off, that's his real name, Creflo Dollar, right? He's a fucking preacher. He had a thing where he basically said God told him that he needed to buy a private jet. Like God told him to have a private jet, or he was going to die. Like if he didn't buy a private jet, then God was going to call him home or some shit like that. So basically, like fleecing his fucking flock for millions of dollars so that he can fly around in a private fucking jet. I guess first class isn't good enough, It's like not only does he have to fly, he has to fly in his own fucking thing. It blows me away, because if you read the Bible, and there's lots of sort of, the Bible is very, very socialist. Rich man will not get into heaven. It's easier for the camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. If you would follow me, take all of your possessions and sell them, right? And shit like that. So Jesus very much did not really give a shit about rich people. And it's funny how it's like, the Christians today believe in the exact opposite of what their fucking religion teaches. It's like they believe now you have that sort of prosperity gospel. The idea that if God loves you, then He'll bless you in this world. That's not what it says. That's not what the Bible says. The Bible does not say you will be blessed in this world. It does not say that you will get riches and money and all that shit. It says you'll be rewarded in the life to come. It doesn't even really say very much about Satan in the Bible either. Typically what the typical person thinks about Satan, right? That is not anywhere in the Bible. The idea that, he's a demon, that you can like sell your soul for goods and monetary gain and power and stuff in this life and then have to go to hell afterwards. That's nowhere in the Bible. There's nothing in the Bible ever about the Satan making a deal with somebody, right? There's shit about him tempting Jesus Christ or whatever. But nowhere is it like, the idea that you can go to the crossroads and like, plant a fucking do a spell and get a demon to show up and then like, you sell your soul in order to get like, a bigger dick or something like that. That's, that shit you see in TV shows like fucking Supernatural, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Twilight Zone, that kind of thing. There's nothing in the Bible about that. It only really mentions the Satan in a couple of places, and it only really uses the word Satan as the adversary, the Satan. And it's because it's in one part where it's in the book of Job, where God and Satan are talking, and Satan is like, Job will turn against you if you do all this bad shit to him. He'll turn against you. And so then God does it. God goes and he does all this bad shit to Job, and he gives him fucking boils, and he kills his family, and he takes away all his land and all that stuff. And it's a parable about how you should, have faith in God, blah, 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 blah. Through the good times and the bad times, too, because God can do whatever the fuck he wants, and God could just strike you dead in a nanosecond if he felt like it. So be fucking happy that you're alive. That's basically the message of the book of Job. That's really the only time where they actually mention the word Satan in the entire Bible, Everywhere else in the Bible, he's not Satan. He's, the serpent or some shit like that. You know what I mean? And There's even like early Christian writers, early Christian, authors and stuff who don't even equate the snake in the Garden of Eden with Satan. That's something that happened later on, So really, what we believe, a lot of the stuff that people believe about Satan and all that, it comes from pop culture. It comes from stuff like, Paradise Lost, Faust. That's another one. Medieval writings of demonology, shit like that, And it really has nothing to do with, the actual accepted canon of, the Bible. So, the whole thing about Satan tried to take over heaven and he fell from grace or whatever and was pushed out of heaven and blah blah blah. That's all shit that comes from other sources. It's all stuff that comes from like, demonology and Paradise Lost and stuff like that. And it's become this sort of like alternative mythology that has nothing to do with like, actual Christian canon. And but that's the thing, is that you'll even hear like preachers and shit talking about this stuff. Right? Preachers that you'll see like evangelical TV preachers and stuff saying all the shit that I just said that has no fucking basis in their own religion. It's not even something that their own religion teaches. And it's like, why do you believe this shit? Because it's part of our culture. It's part of the fucking, it's part of the mythology that evangelical, right-wing Christianity has sort of like, that's evolved with it. So, I don't know. Of course, this is if you believe any of this shit to begin with. I don't. I mean, I'm not really an atheist, but I'm not, I don't believe in fucking Satan or hell or whatever. I'm more of an agnostic myself, honestly. So I guess I'm essentially an atheist in everything except, in everything except title. I basically am an atheist, but not really. I don't know. I believe that there's probably some kind of life after death. I just don't know anything about it. I don't know. I don't think anybody can know anything about it, and thus I think myself personally that it's not worth worrying about, because whether it is all true, whether it's not true, whether it's completely something else, completely different, whether maybe Hinduism is real, maybe Mormonism is the right one, maybe Islam's the right one. Maybe evangelical Christianity is the right one. Who knows? And I guess, I guess we'll all find out after we die. That's my kind of take on it. We'll all find out after we die. And if there actually is a real God, and he is all-knowing and all-loving and all that shit, and he's ultimately moral, he would not send somebody like me to hell for having this, if he's a moral person, he would understand where I'm coming from, and he would not send me to hell for having my doubts, because, a normal, rationing, functional adult would have the same doubts. That's what I think. So, I think it's not worth worrying about, to be honest. And this shit'll happen, because it'll happen to all of us. We're all going to die, right? Every single one of us will die one time, at one point or another within the next 50 to 80 years or so. All of us in this chat are going to be dead, unless you manage to live to be 140 or some shit. So I guess we'll all find out when we get there, and I'll see you. If there's a hell, I'll see you there, because if there is one, I'm most definitely probably going to it. And there's really nothing, if that's the case, then that's the fucking case. So, well, we'll see what happens when we get there. Anyway, guys, I think I'm going to go ahead and end this one. Thank you all for joining. You guys are great. I had a good time during this one. I had a good time with this sort of themed stream, I think we should do more like this. I think maybe we should do one about evangelical Christian politics. That might be a good one. That might take me a little while to research, and I think that'll probably be longer than a 2-hour stream, because there's a lot. Maybe that'll just end up being something that we do in parts, But hey, if any of you guys have suggestions for future streams that you want to see, maybe we could do one about evangelical Christians. Maybe we could do one about Islam. Maybe we can do one about really weird, freaky fringe movements, things like fucking, I don't know, name something. Maybe we could like start exploring like the really weird and wacky shit that people believe, you know, breathanarians and stuff like that. I don't know. Anyhow, folks, but I'm gonna go ahead and end this. We're almost done with it. We're so close. Look how much we got left. We only got like this much left. So I think maybe in the next stream we might finish this. But I am going to go ahead and give you my ending speech and all that stuff because it is about that time. So let me just open up my social media stuff here. And, you know, what do I got here? Blah, blah, blah. And then my webcomic also.com. There we go. So if you like what I do, please like and subscribe. I know I got to say that every time, but, you know, it works. People actually do like and subscribe. I got to put my hand here, and then it'll stop getting all jumpy. And if you like my artwork, then please check out my webcomic. This is, oh, wow, hang on a second. There we go. This is my webcomic. It's hawanja.com, fun for the whole stupid family. And I do comics with ninjas and shit in them, stuff like that. And if you like my artwork, you want to see more, I have a DeviantArt website where I put up a bunch of artwork and things, mainly comics and stuff like this. Here's a here's a sketch I did for a guy at a convention not that long ago. Here's another one, sort of weird, evil, ugly demon monster thing sort of stuff. So yeah, if you like me, you know, please check me out there. I'll put a link in the description. If you like me and you want to support me monetarily, I have my SD shop where I sell prints of things. These are mainly Lovecraft characters, stuff like that. You know, this one is a Lovecraft character here. Remind me later, okay? No, go away. This is you know, Azathoth from Lovecraft, and these are 8.5 or 11 by 17 prints. Each one comes out a little different. They're actually kind of popular. I'm actually selling a lot of them, which is nice. So if you like what I do and want to support me there, you know, please consider buying something. And if you want to hear me talk about video games and toys and crap like that, check out my other YouTube channel. It's UCD Videos. I do toy unboxings, I do game reviews, I do gaming live streams, although I haven't done one in a while. And mainly about video game, like hardware, stuff like that. So anyhow, thank you guys all so much. Thank you, Dynacat. Thank you, you know, Onward to Dystopia and Adversary Fandom. Lewis the Hedgehog, hey man, thanks for joining. Thank you everybody for coming in and checking me out. And I will probably see you next Saturday. I know I did it Sunday this week. It's because I couldn't help it, but probably next Saturday at 11 a.m. Pacific time I will be on again. So anyway, folks, that's all I got.